Hello, welcome to another episode of the DRH Show. As usual, in each episode, I'll be talking to interesting people within psychology, mental health, and wellness. Today, I'm joined by a research fellow from the University of Cambridge, Dr. Barbara McGillivray. Thanks for joining me.
Hello, hi, thanks for having me.
It's great to have you here, Dr. McGillivray. So let's start off with you telling us your backstory, your trajectory in life, and how you ended up doing what you're doing.
Yeah, you can call me Barbara, by the way. Nice to be here. So my trajectory in life, I actually grew up in Italy, as you can maybe tell from my accent, though if you can tell from my surname, I have Scottish origins. So I grew up in a multicultural and multilingual family. And the culture I grew up in was the Italian culture. So I moved here to the UK only 10 years ago, straight after my PhD. So I have this status of expat in a way, although I'm back to the country of my ancestors. Um, I studied a variety of different things. I was a typical good student, so I couldn't really make up my mind when it came to choosing a university degree. So I decided to go with mathematics because I was very fascinated by difficult challenges. And so I did that, but at the same time, I also had a side of me that was really interested in languages. And I had studied Latin and ancient Greek in high school. That's relatively common in Italy. So I didn't want to forget what I had studied. And so I continued taking courses and exams in classics. And so at the end, I had these 2 degrees in maths and classics. And people thought that was really strange at the time. And I also felt like a bit of an outlier in any group I was in. And then I discovered there was a thing called computational linguistics, which combines computer science and linguistics, so the study of languages. And I thought that, wow, that's exactly what I want to do. So I did a PhD in computational linguistics in Pisa. And then I actually had the opportunity to work for Oxford Dictionaries. So I came to the UK to do this job in the dictionaries, which was really fascinating. And then I came back to full-time research in 2017. So I've been at the University of Cambridge and at the Alan Turing Institute for close to 4 years now.
Well, what a lovely trajectory, Barbara. And you're right. A lot of people would really find it weird that you managed to merge two seemingly competing disciplines, maths and humanities. But there you go. You're actually an epitome that you could actually combine two different fields. But on a personal note, can you tell us what makes language so fascinating? And just out of interest, how many languages do you speak?
So I can speak from my own personal experience. I've always found languages fascinating. Actually, my dad was a translator for the European Commission, and my mum worked as a teacher of French in school. So it seems to be part of the family interests. I speak Italian, English, a bit of French, and then I studied Latin and ancient Greek. I can't really say I speak those languages because they're dead languages, but I can read them. Yeah, so that's it. Actually, it's not a huge number, and they're all European languages. Although I'd love to learn non-European languages. And yeah, when it comes to the interest in languages, I actually had a primary school teacher who would explain to us the meaning of words by telling us their origin. So I remember when I was, I don't know, 8, 9, I knew that the word cacophonic means ugly sound because it comes from Greek, the two words from ancient Greek that mean ugly or bad and sound. And so that actually is probably quite uncommon for a primary school kid to know. But our teacher, I think, was right because by explaining to kids what languages mean and how they got to acquire the meaning they have, it actually all seems much less random than it would otherwise seem. So it's really helpful. It really helps to remember what words mean, but also to understand that words have a history. And so this has actually stayed with me till today, and I'm still as fascinated as I was back then.
Now, Barbara, you mentioned you also want to learn about non-European language. I could teach you that because my first language is Filipino. Now, another thing that I really want to ask a linguistic such as yourself is that how do you differentiate a dialect and a language? Because in Philippines, we've got, if I'm not mistaken, about 75 language slash dialect, because I don't really know how to differentiate them. But my understanding is that you would call it a dialect if they're somehow understandable within each other. Is that right?
Yeah, so the distinction is sometimes a bit fuzzy. Normally we say that a dialect does not have a standardized written form. But as I said, some dialects have become official languages also out of political decisions. Again, for example, say I actually grew up in Florence, in Italy, and the Florentine dialect was chosen as the official language of Italy when they were preparing basically the unification of Italy. So in 1861. Before then, Italy wasn't a unified state. So it needed a language, and because of the literary tradition of the Florentine dialect, they chose that as the language. So now people in Florence basically speak the standard Italian in a way. You could say there are differences, but that was a political choice that was made. My husband is actually from Norway, so I also know a bit about the Scandinavian languages and how they are mutually understandable. So Danish, Swedish, and Norwegian are mutually understandable, but because they are related to associated to different political states, they are presented as separate languages. So yeah, as you can see, it's a combination of linguistic, but also decisions made at a different level.
And also politics.
Yes.
And as you've already made it clear earlier, language evolves. As an example, I was reading a magazine last night on bed, and the author said that the word performative has been used differently for the past years, because she said, you're probably aware of this, because if you check it in Oxford dictionaries, the meaning of performative is to perform as opposed to, saying it. But right now, when you read it on newspapers, when you read it on blogs, the word performative means theatrical, it's just a performative decision. So could you also cite some words or, the way we use words that has changed over time?
Yeah, that's actually the topic of my research. So I'm particularly interested in detecting, tracing the changes in meaning of words and how we can get computers to help us in this. And there are lots and lots of words that have changed meaning. And also new words that have appeared. They appear all the time. So we can actually have a look at the word of the year for Oxford dictionaries. I was working for them from 2011 till 2014, and I remember when it was decided that squeezed middle was the word of the year for 2011, and it's still a phrase that we use to refer to the squeezed middle class, after the financial crisis and etc. And when it comes to words that have changed meanings, we could think of, say, words that did not have a technological meaning, like mouse, to refer to the electronic device, or tablet, which originally was just a piece of wood, and now refers to the electronic device. And one that I particularly like is phone, because I grew up in the 80s and 90s, and the default meaning of phone was the analog phone, and you couldn't really see anyone in a phone. But now that a lot of people have smartphones as their default phone, if you want to refer to the old-fashioned phone, you have to say landline phone. So it's fascinating, and I think that the new generations, the toddlers of today, will expect to see someone when they have a call with them, and so explaining to them that actually a phone call does not involve necessarily a camera is going to be hard. So it's
And they're probably not going to recognize the telephone icon, because
yeah.
I'm probably the same age, because I grew up with rotary phone. Like you have to, if you have to make a phone call,
Yes.
you have to do this. So probably 50 years from now, children will recognize like the icon doesn't really make sense, because
No.
you don't really do that.
No, exactly, and we still use that gesture. But
So that's really I think an example of the gradual evolution of language and how it influences our ideas and actions. You mentioned earlier that you also you did computational linguistics. To me, it sounds really foreign. I know what linguistics is, but it sounds foreign to me that it involves computation. So what exactly what you do in a nutshell?
yes, I get asked this question a lot, because it's actually a term that I wasn't aware of until 2005. I can understand lots of people still haven't heard the term. So it's actually related to a lot of things that we interact with every day. So if you use Google and you may be using Google Translate, that's a form of computational linguistics, because it actually translates piece of text from one language to another automatically. Still in Google, if you say search for a word or a group of words, sometimes you don't just get the web pages containing that specific word, but also words that mean the same. So even though if I look for cat, I may be getting web pages about cats or felines or synonyms of the word. So there's a lot of work behind the scenes in these tools that involve basically analyzing language automatically. So it can be at the level of superficial level, like the morphology, so identifying that cats and cat are forms of the same word, or it can be a deeper level, like in the meaning sense, so identifying that feline and cat, and maybe more broadly dog and bird are all animals. So for some purposes, you may just be interested in all the words related to animals. So it's that level of automatic analysis of language that is, in a nutshell, computational linguistics. Other applications of computational linguistics can be speech recognition. So when you speak to your virtual assistant, maybe Amazon Alexa or Google Now, there is a computer program that translates sound into text. That's again computational linguistics, because there's actually quite a lot of work involved in doing that operation accurately. So yeah, it's a very wide field, and it's a recent field. I'd say in the second half of the 20th century, it really took off, and it's really very, very active.
Now, Barbara, aside from doing research on computational linguistics, I understand you're also the editor-in-chief of Journal of Open Humanities and Data. Can you tell us more about the publication and why did you launch it?
Yeah, that's a very exciting project. I actually only joined the journal in 2019. So the journal had been going on since 2015. Since I joined as editor-in-chief, I've been trying to grow this journal, because it's actually a new way of doing research. So the journal is all about open data, specifically for the humanities. So the idea is that people doing humanities research, maybe history or languages or classics, philosophy, they often have to deal with data. Maybe they collect data or they analyze someone else's data and they do transformations on it. Say, for example, you collect some surveys about your research. Maybe you're asking people how COVID is affecting their lives, or you could ask about the language they speak, etc. And so you collect data and then maybe you do a study about that. And normally you just publish the results of the study. And what the Journal of Open Humanities Data is trying to do is encourage people to also publish the data behind their research, because that way they get credit for the work they've put into creating the data, and they also make it available for others to use. So this is a shift in culture research, because it's not something that people are trained to do necessarily as researchers. So it's yes, this journal is not just publishing papers, it's also trying to change the culture. Yeah, we've been doing lots of things for the journal, organizing events, launching special collections. There's one actually on COVID-19 data for the humanities, specifically stressing how there are social and cultural implications in the pandemic we're all living in. And so it's important to collect and share the data that researchers need for this.
And of course, aside from what's happening, the current events that has implications in language, social media platforms, the internet in general also has implications to how the language evolves. So can you talk about how online platforms such as Twitter, Facebook, they have shaped our language? Before, I think social media is partly responsible for some of the language and some of the sort of practices that we do now. Say, for example, cancel culture or doxing. I think that has primarily came from Twitter. So what about Urban Dictionary?
Yeah, now this is really exciting. I did some research on Urban Dictionary and also Twitter, and actually I just completed a project on emoji and the relationship with language. And it's very fascinating, because you may think that official institutions like language academies or dictionaries like Oxford dictionaries can dictate the way language is used, but in fact it's more the other way around. It's language changes no matter what you try to do to it. And so dictionaries like the Oxford dictionaries to actually describe how language changes rather than prescribe it. And yes, these platforms like social media platforms are very powerful in shaping language. So we did a study on Urban Dictionary back in 2018, where we compared it with other dictionaries like crowdsourced dictionaries like Wiktionary, and we found a lot of interesting things. Like, for example, we asked people whether they were familiar with the terms in Urban Dictionary, because if you don't know, Urban Dictionary has this way of defining words, and that is actually very free. So almost anyone can add a definition of a word. And so what you end up with is a lot of opinions about what people think a word means. And so we were able to quantify the extent to which opinions are represented in Urban Dictionary. We also analyzed Twitter, and again, the changing meaning of words in Twitter. And we found very Twitter-specific changes. For example, Vine, which is a normal English word, but it acquired a specific meaning when the video hosting platform Vine was launched. And these changes are very interesting to detect. They also tend to be short-lived. So you actually need quite advanced computational modeling to detect these changes that could, last a few months and then go away. So it's a new way of conceiving language change. We were used to a much slower pace, and now things are going really fast.
Now, you've alluded to earlier that the Oxford Dictionary is descriptive rather than prescriptive. I could understand that with English, because it's not really the native speakers who actually use the English language much. Because if you're going to compare it statistically, there are more second language speakers of English than native speakers.
Yeah.
Where examples of that, we're talking in English in spite of us having it as a second language. But you mentioned that Oxford Dictionary is descriptive. Is that true for any other languages? Say, for example, French or Chinese or Japanese? Because maybe it's just my stereotype, but I understand these people are more protective of, how do I say it, the purity of the language.
Yeah, well, I can't speak for all those languages, but I agree. Some languages have more. There's more of an effort to shape the direction in which the language is evolving. I mean, in Italy too, we have the Accademia della Crusca, which is actually based in Florence, and I think the work that these academies are doing is very useful, because people sometimes need to be told by an authority how they should speak. So it's they provide that level of monitoring of the language. But as I said, language does change no matter what we try to do to it. So yeah, it's kind of a constant tension, and I think these institutions, they can only do so much, and I think they are very useful in reflecting about the language, and so some efforts in shaping language and how we should speak have failed in the past. During the fascism in Italy, you were not allowed to use foreign words, for example, and people may not have done so during that time, but then they did it as soon as they were allowed to. So that's the beauty, I think, of language, that it will change.
Mm-hmm. Also, I don't know if this is still within your remit, but another thing that I noticed is that the use of punctuations also changed.
Yeah.
I don't know if you know the difference I would expect you would know the difference between a hyphen, an M dash, and an M dash. Before, let's say during the 60s, the 50s, people would make a distinction between an N dash and an M dash. But right now, people just use an N dash. And also, it has become, because I'm a blogger, so I read a lot of blogs. And also, you would notice on blogs that sometimes they just use a lot of dashes. But before, you don't see that kind of writing. People are more, they would rather use a semicolon or a comma. Is that also something that you explore? How culture, how language influence the way we use punctuation? Also, I understand that there was a research among teenagers that they find it a bit weird if people use full stop as opposed to exclamation point, because they said you can sound abrupt. Whereas if you use exclamation point, you sound more friendly. Did you do any piece of research along those lines? I suppose it falls within your research about emojis, communicating emotions through written words.
Yes, it's not an area I've spent a lot of time researching, but you're right. It is part of the way language is changing, and it's also a consequence of the platforms we're using. So if you're writing, if you're texting, or if you're writing on your smartphone using an app, depending on the operating system and the keyboard settings and all of that, you may be spelling things and using punctuation differently. And this is, yes, really interesting to observe. So as part of the emoji study that we just submitted, actually, 3 days ago, we looked at the time the point in which an emoji was introduced, and then how it it got used in different platforms, and then how it changed its meaning. And so it becomes a quite more complex phenomenon to study, because you have to consider these different factors. But yeah, I can confirm that that's also my experience. I will find myself using more exclamation marks even in emails, because I understand that the perception has changed.
What about doing research linking mental health and language? Have you done any research of that? For instance, because my background is in psychology, I've noticed that a lot of people use a lot of psychiatric diagnosis in language. Let's say, for instance, OCD, even though it doesn't really, it doesn't really mean that you've got a psychiatric diagnosis of OCD, but people just use it. So have you done any research on that?
Well, actually, yeah, thanks for this question. I haven't done specific research on this, but I submitted a grant proposal which was aimed at analyzing the change in mental health terminology over time. So the idea is to build a team with medical historians and experts in mental health history, and linguists and library professionals to collect a lot of collections from different sources, very recent, but also more historical sources. So newspapers on one hand, historical newspapers from the 19th century, for example, but also web archives from the 20th and 23rd century, 21st century, sorry, and then using computational linguistics methods like what I've been developing in the past few years to track the evolution of mental health words. So, for example, melancholia or hysteria were words that had stigma associated to them. And so no one has done a systematic analysis of the use of these words over time and the effect that they have on people's perception of mental conditions. So if that project gets funded, then I will certainly have a lot more to say on this topic in the years to come. It's a very fascinating topic, and one I'd love to do more research on.
Yeah, absolutely. And we look forward to hearing how your funding application goes. Now, another thing that I want to ask you, Barbara, is what about language and stigma? Do you think that people become more receptive about psychiatric terms over time, or there's still a bit of resistance about psychiatric terms or anything terms relating to mental health?
Well, I can't really say directly what big trends that I observed, because I haven't done yet that kind of analysis. But I think that a study on this topic would require a real close collaboration between linguists and medical professionals, and people with who are experiencing mental health disorders, because it's only through interdisciplinary work that we can really get to the bottom of these complex phenomena. So I'd love to do more.
Yeah. But perhaps some people who are listening to this would love to collaborate with you. As you've said, it's really a multidimensional field, relating mental health, stigma, and language. So are there any fields that you're also interested in? I understand you work in data science and historical linguistics. Are there any fields that you're also interested in?
So you mentioned data science, and that's a term that maybe not everyone is familiar with.
Explain to us what data science is and historical linguistics.
Yes. So data science is a term that is very relatively recent, and it is, again, an interdisciplinary field. So it includes all those disciplines that have to do with analyzing data, but also methodologies for collecting and interpreting data. So it involves computer science, because we want to develop ways in which computers can get meaning from data at scale. So examples of the research I've done is part of data science, but also ethical concerns around privacy, for example, and transparency of algorithms. So there's a lot of talk recently about what algorithms can or cannot do, and how much access to data we're giving away, and all these considerations they're really important to consider. Statistics, of course, because you're talking about analyzing a lot of data, so looking and extracting patterns in data. So I actually worked as a data scientist in industry before going back to research. After working for Oxford Dictionaries, I worked in academic publishing as a data scientist, and there I was basically looking at articles published and their citations, and the way people would read them, how many times they would download them, and trying to understand what makes an article highly cited or highly downloaded. So this is quite a complex field, but it's very fascinating, and it's very practical. And data scientists are needed everywhere, really. If you're launching an app that traces anything that you do, really, they're probably data scientists analyzing those data to inform the app, to make it better, to understand people's behavior better. And so my interest is actually at the intersection between data science and more humanistic fields like historical linguistics, which is basically concerned with understanding how language changes. I had to set up a group at the Alan Turing Institute, where I work, as well as in Cambridge, called Humanities and Data Science. And the idea is to get the two groups of people to talk together. So there has been the separation between the scientists on one hand, and the data scientists, and the humanists. And more, we need to talk, and we need to have a conversation to share methods and points of view, because the humanities are increasingly having access to lots of data. As I said, with the work I'm doing for the Journal of Open Humanities data, nowadays, if you do research in humanities, you probably have access or collecting data of some sort, whether it's an archive or survey responses, or maybe a database or a collection of maps. All these things count as data. So it's important to have a dialogue with the people who do the research analyzing data, but also giving a humanistic perspective. And so we published a white paper with this group called Reflections and Challenges at the Intersection Between Humanities and Data Science. I'm very fascinated by what happens when you bring different disciplines together, different communities in the same room. So that's more broadly what I'm interested in.
Mm-hmm. So that sounds really fascinating, how different fields work together to explore a particular field. Now, another thing I want to ask you, Barbara, is do you have any tips for learning a new language? I suppose it's a cliche questions linguistics often gets asked. And also, why is it that we have an accent? What's the purpose of accent? And why is it that some people seem to be able to mask their accent, like actors and actresses, they seem to be good at it, whereas some people, no matter how hard they try to blend in with the native speakers, they seem to still have their accent?
Yes, well, that's actually something I've been thinking about a lot, because I have a Scottish surname. People expect me to if anything, have a Scottish accent. But then I have a kind of Italian accent in a way, but I've been trying to.
I can't really hear your Italian accent.
Yeah, you have. Yeah, I'm probably, you can't hear it, but you can hear that something is not quite, like, I'm not quite a native speaker. And so this is something that has bothered me for quite some time, because it also has to do with my identity as an Italian, but also British and actually New Zealand citizen. So I have these 3 citizenships, and yeah, it's not so easy to kind of live with all these three national identities. But actually, I came to the realization that everyone has an accent. Maybe you have a foreign accent, or maybe you have a local accent. And actually, as a foreigner, if you try very hard to hide your own accent, to sound like you're speaking the standard language, you will sound foreign just because you don't have a local accent. So I think it kind of creates a complex in the person trying to hide their accent, because if there was something wrong with it. So yeah, no, I think that more generally we should have less stigma on people with an accent, and as long as they can make themselves understood and clearly, then people should not judge other people because they have an accent, and we should go to what they actually have to say.
Yeah.
So this is sometimes it related to class. I actually
Mhm.
noticed this in the UK. Happens a lot. In Italy you have more of a south north divide, and so historically southern dialects have had more of a stigma, and so people have tried to hide their accent. But hopefully this is gradually going away with people exchanging and traveling a lot more than they used to. So yeah, and it is to some extent personal. Some people seem to be more gifted than others in learning other accents. I actually have a toddler, a son who is almost 2 years old, and he's learning Italian and Norwegian, a bit of English, and so I'm actually watching him learn these languages. And obviously, the way um, a very young child learns language is not the same as an adult, but it seems that really encouragement and exposure are the best ways people can learn a language effectively. I struggled with English for many years because I grew up with my mom, but I wanted to study English. So I studied English for many years, but until I moved to a country where I was forced to speak English every day, I actually wasn't fluent. And it was only when I went to Norway, which is a country where people speak English very well, but it's not their native language, that I felt free to speak English without feeling judged. And then my then boyfriend was actually an English teacher, so he was very patient and very good at encouraging me, and that actually made me go over the the hurdle that I had. And yeah, now I'm completely comfortable with English, to the point that sometimes I forget Italian words. So I would say, for anyone wanting to learn language, try and go to the country, or try to be exposed to the language as much as possible, but without that sense of inferiority, which is not hard but to get rid of. But it's
Yeah. As they say, the best way to learn a language without sounding really vulgar is to sleep with a local. Yeah.
yeah, I guess if
Uh,
there's a lot of talking involved as well.
yeah. Anyways, you've been studying language for a huge part of your life, so I'm quite sure that you've encountered some misconceptions about language. So, can you tell us those misconceptions that you've come across and sort of address them?
Misconceptions about language. Well, yeah, there are quite a few. I mean, the idea, for example, that there is one way to speak a language, and that it's fixed, and that somehow other people decide. This is misconception. A lot of people ask me, yes, we worked for the Oxford Dictionary, so how should we speak? How should I spell this word? And the reality is that lexicographers and people making dictionaries just reflect on what the actual use of the language. So there's a term called term corpus, which is used in linguistics and in lexicography to refer to collection of texts. And actually, corpora so collections of texts are used by professional linguists to analyze language, because that's the way they can observe how the language is used. So that's one big misconception that I've heard a lot. And also, as you said, the question you asked me about dialects and languages, and there's some sort of level and of quality between the two is also misconception, because dialects are just as valuable and important as languages, even if they sometimes don't have the recognition or the authoritative status that languages have. But it's very important to preserve dialects, because it's the richness and the diversity of languages that make our society and our culture so interesting. It's a little bit like eco-diversity. We want to maintain it as much as possible, and same for languages. We want languages to continue to thrive and to live. We want, there's a whole field dedicated to endangered languages, because it is a real danger that we're losing languages. So yeah, if you're speaking one of those rare languages, please don't feel somehow of an outlier or uncomfortable. You should be proud of speaking that language, and we want to preserve those languages.
Yeah, absolutely. And I just want to touch about what you said about, you know, the Oxford dictionary, people working for the dictionary, and this kind of an expectation that you're supposed to be proper and accurate with the way you use language. And I just observed that even the Oxford dictionary is not consistent with, you know, how it imposed a language or a rule. Say, for instance, the use of S and Z on
Yes.
verbs, like organize and organize with the Z.
Yeah.
On dictionary, they would say S. But if you look at the website of the university, the Oxford University, it's a mixed bag. So
Yes.
yeah, and
Oh.
Hmm?
Sorry, yes, no, I did notice that when I was working for them, and they do have a principled way of deciding which version is the correct British version, and it has to do also with the etymology of the word. But as actually, I noticed that even those things change, because as people use one version more than another, the dictionary will adapt and will record that. Were you going to ask me another question?
Yeah, I was just going to say, even with Cambridge Dictionary, you can also observe the same, even with the way they use those words ending in st, like among and amongst. They would say one thing on the dictionary website, but if you go to the publication, it's a different thing. So it's like you're telling us to do this, but you're actually doing something else on practice.
Yeah, I mean, having worked for dictionaries, I can say that it's also really hard to keep dictionaries up to date, because they have a lot of legacy data and, you know, versions of the dictionaries, and trying to keep the content consistent all the time is really hard. You know, they have hundreds thousands of words, of entries as you call them. So yeah, it may be that there is a project going on behind the scenes that is looking at harmonizing all of this content, or it may be that we are witnessing a kind of shift in the usage of standard forms. And so yeah, it just shows how dynamic language is.
Yeah, that's really difficult to, you know, I suppose to guard the language. You've been working on as I've said, you've been working about linguistics, and it's also a very unique field, computational linguistics. So Barbara, what's the big message? What do you want the public to know about your work?
Well, I want to know them to know that this is valuable research that is actually not as far from your everyday life as you may think. So if you interact with a search engine, you want to find something, you probably are dealing with text in some way, whether it's, you know, instruction manuals or blog posts or poetry. That you have lots and lots of text that you want to somehow get your hands on in some way. And so the research that I do helps you do that by finding ways to extract meaning from text, and automatically, because we can't read all text by hand anymore, really, and so we need computers to help, but it's always a human that is in control. So we're not going to be at the point where the computers will take over. The field is very much looking at the humans in at the center, and so and it's not just the researchers, but it's also the people using language. So yes, next time you come across a researcher working in language, I hope you'll feel that they are closer to you than you might have thought.
Okay. Also, another thing that I'd like to tell you, Barbara, is a lot of people who would be watching this are actually students. So some might be inspired to follow your path. Could you recommend good resource to explore more, or just to learn the basics of linguistics? Are there any special books? Or what?
Yeah, well, there are lots of books. If you have taken linguistics courses, you probably have come across the the fathers of linguistics like Chomsky, Saussure, of course. But computational linguistics is also establishing its own kind of history, and there are introductions to computational linguistics. I actually just published a book which is called Applying Language Technology to Humanities Research, and it's meant for students in humanistic disciplines and researchers who want to grasp the concepts of what you call language technology or computational linguistics. So it's a short book published by Palgrave, and it's co-authored by me and Gabor Toth, who is a historian. So we picked some case studies of questions that are relevant to historians, and we explained how computational linguistics can be used to answer them. So I can also recommend that book, and you can also get in touch with me directly. I'm very happy to share my experience and to give any advice or recommendation.
So what I'll do, Barbara, is I'll put all those links to those on the notebook, so everyone who wants to explore more about language and get in touch with you could follow you. Barbara, what do you think you would be doing if you didn't work as a linguist?
If I didn't work as a linguist, well, I did ballet for many, many, many years. Actually, I studied ballet for 19 years, and then I switched to Argentine tango. So maybe I could have been a dancer. Who knows?
Yeah, that's interesting. From being a linguist to a dancer. And also, Barbara, how do you relax? What's your de-stressing outlet?
So nowadays I have long walks with my son and my husband. It's something that I didn't used to do before the pandemic, but now we are kind of decreased our level of social interaction, and we actually learned to enjoy nature a lot more, and it's really really nice. So in the spring we would have a walk after work, and that a good 1 hour walk. I live in Oxford, and 5 minutes from my place, I can actually get into nature. I can see rabbits and squirrels and birds and yes, animals that you wouldn't imagine in a city. Even deers and foxes. So it's actually really nice to tune into nature that way. In winter, we've been doing those walks in the mornings, and it's also nice to get natural light and to be energized before a day working from home. So I really treasure that. Before the lockdown, I would have probably said very different things, like going to the cinema, dancing tango. But now, yes, I've learned to appreciate nature.
Yeah, it's not just that that the pandemic COVID-19 changed the way we do things, but also going to just to tie in with what we're talking about language. Um, the word pandemic, lockdown, unprecedented. I would expect it would be part of our vocabulary for such a long time. Especially that unprecedented. You probably hear that like 100 times a day. But it's been lovely talking to you, Barbara. Finally, what else is in the pipeline? Do you have any upcoming project? I understand you've just written a book, but do you have any speaking engagement? And also remind us again where we can get in touch with you. Are you also on Facebook, or do you have a website?
Yeah, so you can get in touch with me on Twitter. My handle is Barbara McGillivray, so it's the beginning of my surname. And yeah, I have a webpage on the Alan Turing Institute website. So you can just Google my name and the Alan Turing Institute, and you'll find me. And yeah, I have a few things in the pipeline. The emoji paper is a really exciting one. Hope it gets accepted and published soon, so I can share more of that research very soon. Also working on funding grant on Latin. So it's still a very important passion of mine to study all the languages as well. And so we want to do a big project on tracing the evolution of Latin language over time. Uh, we have lots of things in the pipeline for the Journal of Open Humanities data. So we are on Twitter for that one as well. And we have a website that we keep up to date. We're also putting up YouTube videos of our events. So the best way to stay in touch is following us on Twitter or joining our mailing list. Again, if you Google Journal of Open Humanities data, you'll find our website.
Absolutely, exciting projects, and like what I've said, I'll put all of those links on the description box, so everyone could get in touch with you. Dr. Barbara McGillivray, it's a pleasure having you here on the DRH show. It's been fascinating conversation, and I look forward to hearing more about your work.
Thank you very much for the invitation, and yeah, looking forward to staying in touch.